I'm Michael Mott.
That's me.
Do you have like a kryptonite, a weakness? It could be anything. I'm thinking specifically food related. I have like one major weakness where I don't go crazy with like sweets or desserts, but there's like one certain thing that I can just
Like
eat
if it's there, you can be like,
dude, so much where it's like borderline not good,
Right,
and it's like only this one thing, and I can't control myself.
Self-control.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah, I do. My mother-in-law likes to make it for me.
She knows your weakness.
Fudgy brownies with vanilla ice cream. It's like the
combo.
I could get 2 huge bowls of that, and it's like you just feel miserable afterwards, but it's like during it, you feel really good.
Dude, mine is Krispy Kreme donuts.
Oh,
in college, I could knock out like a dozen of those, and I feel terrible afterwards.
do you feel like kind of almost lightheaded because of the sugar rush?
Well, I don't do that anymore, but we just got some
Anymore.
When I was in college, there was one right next to where I went to school, and we would get that stuff a lot. Now, so if you get A's on report cards, so when the boys get report cards, we just got report cards.
Like, well, let's go.
We went there, and they I think they hate us there. I don't think the employees care because they're like burnout teenagers who are like, I don't care what happens. Yeah, they're zombies.
Yeah.
They're moving very slow, but the donuts are so good, I'll wait there.
Right.
And we basically had like you pay for a dozen, get one free, / Jaden and Jackson's report cards, try to get all those. And then Leanne's birthday's in January, we're supposed to get like 3 free donuts. So we're just like we're like these, we're living off of welfare.
48 donuts.
We're just taking advantage. They're like, you're trying to scam the system. It was bad because I think this is totally allowed, but Leanne's got to do a transaction, and I have to do a transaction because you can't double up on certain things. So I don't know if people are judging us.
Hey, we're doing what we're doing. I have seen videos of like bodybuilders, like they're done with their competition, and they've been what's it called when you're cutting, cutting. And so now, and I've seen them take 8 donuts and they're Krispy Kremes and slam them down and then just start eating 8 at a time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you ever do that?
I try. I am more in moderation now, but I'm not going to lie to you. Last night, I just had 4 in about 5 minutes. And then I'm like, okay, I got to stop. Leanne's looking at me, and I'm like, I know, but it's but they're so that's the one thing that's man, and it's really not fair because they are so light and fluffy.
Right.
You really don't feel like.
What's the calories on one?
I read it was 190 because I was
190
for
one. Oh my head!
I don't know that's true, but I was like, this should not be real. It's like you're eating nothing.
I know. What amazed me when and I have sometimes I'll be counting calories. Sometimes I'm not counting calories. But when I start counting calories, the thing that I cut out the most, not because I don't like it, it's milk because it's so high in calories and it's I can't afford to drink, a tall glass of milk because
that you're done.
Boom.
Your meal's got a lot less for the rest of the day. It's one of those things too. And when I was younger, I'd always be not that I was counting calories super closely, but I'll be I'll just run a mile, and you're running a mile's nothing. You gain 200. It's you don't burn any calories.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's. I think you do burn calories in the residual.
Correct. So if you work out, especially if you're weightlifting or something,
then you're burning calories to repair stuff. So it's not. I think, but yes, to your point, you can't. I've heard someone say you can't outrun your spoon. Because you can put in way more calories than you can exercise off. It is crazy.
Anyway, I just wanted to see because I feel I have remorse because we just got so many Krispy Kreme. I had 4 last night. I just popped over there, had 3 more today, and Land's say something for the kids. I'm there's plenty for the kids. They got all there is, but I'm okay.
How many do the kids need?
How many they need anyway?
One.
Whatever. Yeah,
if you can't eat 4, then how many are they eating? 2 or 3? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, and she was probably.
So what I hear you saying is when we're eating these things, we need to be exercising some wisdom.
Have some discernment, have some wisdom. What a great segue into the topic of our podcast. Today, we're doing one of our Sunday school classes, adult discipleship classes, is going over wisdom literature, a little introduction.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and take it to the next level. From the heart of the Low Country in South Carolina,
it's the Take 2 podcast, where we take theology to the next level.
Wisdom. It's one of those things I think we all need it. I always find myself like, I'm never like, I got too much wisdom.
Right. Yeah.
You ever in that situation?
Too
Like,
high.
I got it covered.
I am just, man, I'm just kicking this out of the park too much.
I am just, no, I think that's a pretty universal feeling where it's like, man, I wish I had more discernment for the situation, trying to navigate the right path forward. Not the exact same thing as understanding wisdom literature, but kind of use that as a jumping off point just to, get us thinking about it.
Yeah, I've heard wisdom being described as applied knowledge or applied understanding. So it's like, I know the right thing and pair it up with the self-control to do the right thing.
Yeah, because those are two different things, right?
Right.
And, I was kind of reflecting on this, and, I think, I'm not breaking any news, everyone knows they should exercise more.
Right.
Yeah. Everyone knows, don't be on social media every hour of every day. Everyone knows these things are bad for you, but I think most of us overwhelmingly, like, don't do what we're supposed to do, because it's hard to factor that in. You're busy, but everyone's like, oh, you feel better. Your risk for all these bad things go down. You're not going to be depressed, but I'm still like scrolling on social media more than I should.
Yeah.
And I think, that speaks to that, wisdom is applied knowledge. We know what to do. Yeah. We just don't always do it.
Yep. I think that's really good. And of course, there's only one book in the Bible that gives us wisdom, Proverbs. So don't look for wisdom anywhere else in the Bible. That's what I thought I heard you say. Is that what you said?
That is a lie. And one of the things that got me excited for this class is that, trying to look at all the wisdom books we have, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, they really answer these big questions of life, but they do so from a unique perspective. It's probably on purpose.
Right.
It's probably to show.
You think it wasn't a mistake by God?
Yeah, I don't think God messed up, because I think someone like Job could be like, these Proverbs, I'm like nailing these Proverbs.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't feel like I've got health and wealth and prosperity and success. And it's like, okay, balancing these things out are really a really good thing to do, because I find myself, I can be in the Proverbs all day. That's like a fun place to be.
Right.
And honestly, I'll read the first 3 chapters of Job. I'll read the last chapter or two.
Man. I'm there with you. The middle of Job is very difficult because
Hebrew
you don't
poetry.
know.
Oh yeah,
you don't know how to interpret this. Is God, because it's some guy talking to Job, and it's like,
how much weight do I say this is good or not good?
I think Joel should do a series through Job where he has to go verse by verse through all of that.
No, that is great. And to your point, we'll talk about this more in Proverbs. Have you ever heard anyone, preach verse by verse through Proverbs? It's pretty impossible.
Yeah.
Because the topics repeat, but they're not together. You kind of have to do it topically.
Right. And that's like I did have a pastor who did kind of do topically. So he would say like, here, Proverbs has a lot to say about money.
Yes.
And he would kind of pull all the Proverbs about money together. Or Proverbs has a lot to say about, adultery and lusting. And he'd kind of pull all those together. Or, but yes, it's not, you don't go orderly, because it's like, this topic, back to this topic. It's kind of, it's all over. And
furthermore, we'll probably talk about this more in a different lesson, but it's like when it's like that, Romans, we can trace an argument. We can get that Jensen chart out. We say, here's Paul's 2 questions here. We know Paul is writing to a specific people at a specific time for a specific reason.
Right.
When Proverbs are all scattered like that, it's hard to grab onto a context.
Right.
And I think that makes it a little bit more challenging. And a lot of the wisdom books are kind of like that in the fact that, for the most part, not exclusively, but we don't hear a lot about Israel or covenants or temples or sacrifices. Proverbs talks nothing at all about prophets or priests. Seem like that's a big deal in biblical theology. We're just going to skip over that.
Right.
So some of this, we know it's wisdom, but it seems somehow disconnected. So my goal in this class is not to answer every question on Job or all of that, because I don't think you can do it well. I don't know what to
do with myself now.
Yeah, no, it's like, you go back and forth. I'm going to re-listen to your Ecclesiastes sermon. I know you preached a year or 2 ago or whatever. Yeah. Because Ecclesiastes, there's like so many different interpretations on certain things. It's like, how do you just give people tools to study it?
Yeah. I just tell them use mine, and that's the best interpretation. And that's good.
That's what I'm going to listen to your sermon, so I can have it all nailed down.
Talking about Proverbs, I have heard someone say, you may know his name, Greg Kokel, but he laments that he's like, how many people are there that that read a chapter of Proverbs a day corresponding to the day of the month? I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
I've heard that. Very common.
Yeah, 31 Proverbs, whatever the day is, just read that chapter. And that's a great practice. But like you said, it is all over the place. And he's like, they're so short and pithy.
Yeah.
He's like, that's almost too much for me. Like I get overwhelmed. That's a
great point. You walk away.
And he's like, so what I do is I read half of a proverb a day. So I know this is going to get a little bit nerdy, but if like January 1 through 31, read the first half of it. February, read the second half of those proverbs. Go back on March, read the first half. So if it's an odd month, you read the first half. If it's an even month, read the second half, corresponding to the day. And that was his solution to it.
That's cool.
And he's like, comparing, contrasting this to something like Jeremiah 29:11, where people like it would be do you well to read the whole chapter of Jeremiah 29, maybe 28, 20, to get all the context. Where we're reading full chapters of Proverbs, and there's not really a context to grasp there for most part. It talks about wisdom in some spots, and then you got the virtuous woman, and then you have the guy who kind of gets caught in adultery. I think that maybe Proverbs 6 or something. So you have some sections that kind of pull together, but then other than that, it's just kind of shotgunned all over.
No, that's great. That's great. And we'll get into that more because that's like where my head's been at. We're a week ahead in Sunday school, so I've been thinking a lot about Proverbs. But when you think about wisdom literature, this is great too. We won't have to spend time, but I show this hilarious video of me just running into Juliana's car. It's not wise.
I saw this. I got to hear about it, I guess, secondhand because Chloe was there and she was like, it was so crazy.
It was insane. It was a disaster. But trying to focus around, we'll get into wisdom literature. What's really interesting is, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, those are wisdom books, de facto, wisdom proper, universally accepted. Everything else is kind of like up for debates.
Right.
Different scholars are like...
Are we Old Testament only?
Well, it's up for debates.
Yeah. Because some people would throw James in there as a wisdom. New Testament wisdom. And then I could see Song of Solomon, wisdom in your relationships.
Yeah.
Whether, don't basically evoke romance too early. Talks about that in some place. And then how to properly love your spouse. Talks about that. So you could say that that's wisdom.
And a lot of people do. I was actually going to take like one class and do over a book, but then I was like, oh, that's too much. I need to spread it out more. And I was like, people want to hear about Song of Solomon, go to the marriage class. But it's, exactly right. Some people say, hey, Psalms through Song of Solomon, wisdom literature, because there's so much Hebrew poetry in that connection. Some people are like, 1 Kings 1 through 11 talks about Solomon's life. That's wisdom literature because it talks about wisdom a lot. Some people are like, well, Song of Solomon's not wisdom literature. We don't really use the word wisdom a lot, but the people are like, but it's a relationship is connected to Solomon. Yeah. So you've got all these different things. I spent time in that first lesson.
I was just thinking, one could argue, like Ruth, even though it's a history, not Ruth, Esther, even though it's a history book, it's kind of like practically, you could see wisdom through there. So it's not poetry.
It's not out,
So it's not like the same, but there are other places where you're going to see wisdom on display.
That's exactly right. So all that to say, no one's really agreed outside of those three books what would consider the different categories. Some people would say New Testament's out because we want to think about this ancient Near Eastern, like a very hyper-specific Mesopotamian, like Hebrew, Semitic thing that would have been like out of date those hundreds of years later. So everyone's kind of different. But really where wisdom literature is united, this part of Scripture answers a lot of life's big question. Like, how do you live life well? What kind of things matter? What should you pursue? What kind of things should you stay away from?
Yeah.
Why do bad things happen to good people? Or why is there evil and suffering? Or how does the world work? Are there patterns, relationships, that kind of thing?
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. And would you say that wisdom literature are promises?
Oh, see, this is the age-old question, and this is really good. Maybe we can talk about it more because you look at Proverbs, and you're either a health, wealth, and prosperity teacher, and you're like, you obey God, you got $1 million, you have a new car, or you can be like Job and have everything taken from you. And so I think your answers, you can say what your thoughts are. Answers are, it's either the long game, maybe not in this life, but the next.
Right.
Because one of the premier scholars that's alive today in Psalms and Proverbs, it's Bruce Waltke. He's got a lot of stuff out there. He's got this awesome commentary that's very in depth. He's basically saying I don't get why all these people say Proverbs are probabilities, but not promises. He's like, these are promises, or like, what's the point of it? Or he has like he goes into a lot where, if you're saying that, then like, what's the point of it being the word of God? Then you have this other guy, Richard Belcher, who is great. He's a professor at Reformed Theological Seminary, and he's basically saying things like Proverbs, they're context specific. So in one context, it might be true, but another might not be. He looks at like this proverb, like answer a fool according to his folly. And then right after that, it says like the opposite.
Don't answer
and so
a fool. Yeah.
It depends on the life situation. And so it's not universal, but they all are true.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess what has helped me was I was under someone's teaching, and they were saying these are not promises, but they are life principles. They are general principles that if you live your life according to them, your life is going to be one that is marked by wisdom. And it's not like, because we've all seen, and I throw this out, but here's the kind of the cliche example, train up a child in the way he should go.
Yes, yeah.
And he will not depart from it when he is old. And I guess you could always say, well, I guess those parents didn't train that child up.
Yeah.
But you have like maybe 6 kids and one of them goes astray, and you're like, did that one really get completely different parenting than the others?
Yeah.
That's the likelihood is down. So I think it's good to think of these as general principles on life, how to live your life well, and then they're not necessarily like it's not like a math problem, a calculus. You get this, you put this in, and you're going to get this result out just mechanically.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good that you do these things. If you work hard, you can expect to provide for your family.
Yeah.
Most of the time, there might be a situation where like you're in this accident, something happens, and you're like, that's bizarre. Yeah. But I think that is the good part of books like Ecclesiastes, and where it's like, oh, this is all a paradox. Like it should go this way, but it didn't. A lot of this part of scripture is practical, and really one of the goals are I honestly don't like poetry. I'm not into literature. I struggle with imagination and creativity, and so a lot of times I read through some of this. I'm just like we were talking about like Job. I'm just like motoring through it because I'm like, what am I? How am I making sense of this anyway? So my goal with this class is just to maybe set up some basic things to think about that might help you understand it better. It's not going to be exhaustive or comprehensive, but maybe a couple of little things you can be like, oh, this makes more sense. I kind of get what the author's trying to say a little bit better. Yeah,
just putting tools in the tool bag to help people understand. That's good.
Because I know so little about poetry. All this is like, oh, this is so great, great to me. Some key features of wisdom psalms. So spent the first time talking a lot about Psalms, which people are probably like, why aren't we in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, or Job? But I thought it's a good place. People are familiar with the Psalms and having an introduction to Hebrew poetry.
And we did do, think it's good. So if you go back to around Thanksgiving time, did do a podcast that kind of did an overview of Psalms. I heard you teach a lot of that in this class.
Yes, I stole a lot of it from our podcast.
Right, yeah. So if you didn't hear that, it would be good to go back and hear that because there is structure to the book of Psalms.
That's true.
There are different types of Psalms, but we've already covered that fairly recently. So go back to around Thanksgiving. And you'll see us cover that. But one of those types was a wisdom psalm.
Wisdom psalm. And there's a good chunk of wisdom psalms. I don't know the number, maybe like 15 or something. And then there's probably like another 10 or 15 that maybe aren't primarily wisdom psalms, but they have wisdom components to them. Like a psalm like Psalm 119. A lot of people are going to say that's a Torah psalm. But in there, it's saying, God makes wise the simple. And, it alludes to the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's a big theme. So a lot of these things go together. And I guess before we get into the Psalms and some of this wisdom literature, some things to keep in mind are probably a lot of the same things you would think about with English poetry. What kind of things make it different from prose? This figurative lange, rhyming scheme. Roses are red, violets are blue. There's a million, poems based on that. Meter, wordplay. I think the hard thing is in our English translations, it's hard to pick up on wordplay and puns unless you have a commentary or something pointing it out to you. You'd be like, oh, I didn't get that. But if you saw that, you'd be like, oh, this is making a point.
Right. And speaking of things losing there, so if you go to a Shakespearean play over in England or probably anywhere, you're probably going to hear it being read with a modern day English accent.
Oh, instead of the like how they, yeah.
But I heard
that.
recently that the closest accent that is around today,
Yeah.
as to when he was writing, is a Southern accent.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So they were saying that the iambic pentameter that he wrote. So that's a shout out to all those English teachers that drilled that into our minds. Iambic
that's
pentameter.
like the one thing I remember. Like that's funny. Yeah.
5 da 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 da. But it is better in a Southern. Now there's extremes to the there's not just a single Southern accent, but probably
that's great.
Probably my accent, is
Shakespearean. That's
Southern.
Really funny.
That's
I need to look
influenced
at that.
a little bit by that Midwestern.
This is the sweet spot. Well, and
the point in all that is, if from Shakespeare, same language, we get just a little bit of drift over
that's right.
a few years. We're talking about thousands of years ago, different language, different context, different time. There's going to be some misses that we don't get.
That's a great analogy because, you read a Shakespeare play, and I don't understand even some of their colloquialisms, and it's not been that long ago. Can you imagine? God in his providence, when it comes to Hebrew poetry, the chief characteristic is parallelism, which I think is pretty amazing because you can see those couplets, those two lines where you have 2 lines or so, usually 2 lines, where words or phrases in one line correspond to words and phrases in the other line, and you can see the relationship where you might have it being synonymous. They're saying the same thing, different words, antithetical, synthetical, these kind of things. And I think most of us, as you're reading, you kind of, whether you're labeling them, you kind of say, okay, this is an opposite, this is the same, this is building. So things to keep in mind. And like we talked about in that Psalms podcast, Michael's referencing chiasm. That's a good thing to keep in mind as well, because we just don't think in those terms.
Yeah, and I think we were kind of talking about a little of this before the podcast, because this is our second podcast, so it's been just a second. But when I first was introduced to the concept of chiasm, I was in seminary. I was either in Old Testament 1 or 2, wherever this fell, and I just thought, people trying to pull more out of the Bible than that's there. Can we not just read the Bible and take it at face value? Let's okay, but from that first exposure, maybe back in 2013 to today, I've really my eyes have been opened, and so much to the point that I've thought, if you're not familiar with the structure of a chiasm, at least on the lookout, you might mistake what the main idea of a psalm is. Because if you think about it from like all of us, well, I'd say all of us, most of us have been, gone through this process of writing, and it's prose, but what do? You put your thesis statement up front, and then you provide some supporting paragraphs, and then you have a conclusion where your thesis is stated strongly again, and you kind of cite all of those conclusions. So really, the important things are at the beginning and at the end, and that's it's just not how it is. I'm not saying it's not important, but kind of in the middle is where you have these kind of the meatier, weightier kind of parts of what's important in when you're dealing with the chiastic parallelism.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and just something to be aware of. Not that you can't understand the Bible without knowing what a chiasm is, but it does orient yourself to what's the author saying. This is either the main point, or sometimes it's like a turning point. It's like something that you need to pay attention to. Right.
And I was recently in a class, I won't say where or when, just recently, where a psalm was being taught, and I was like, oh, this is chiastic in nature, and the teacher did not know that wasn't there. And so it was confusing because you have these the beginning and end were parallel, and they're like, well, why would he be saying this again? I'm like, well, I know why he's saying it. And I didn't want to speak up. But I was like, he's restating this. This is a restatement of this in a slightly different way. And it's emphasizing this top point, and you work your way in, and here's his main point. But they didn't go away not knowing what the psalm was saying, but there's this second level of organization in that psalm that they were missing.
Man, that very, very well said. So let's maybe look at a couple of wisdom psalms. I'm going to skip down, Michael, to 8 just because everyone knows Psalm 1.
Yeah.
Very common psalm. Yeah. And it's at the beginning of the Psalter on purpose to set the tone. And this is something that wisdom literature does a lot. It'll set out You got a way to live your life. You got a couple of choices. You can live righteously. You can be like a tree planted by rivers of water. You can be stable. You can be prosperous. Or you can walk this other way where you'll perish. You're unstable. And to be on this righteous path, you need to do things like meditate on God's word, hang out with the right people. You'll be blessed. And that's a key kind of big picture overview that you got choices to make. And so thought we would start there just because people know Psalm 1. And so just know that that's a wisdom psalm.
Yeah. So part of it is this imagery because, we're not, part of it is, are the wicked really blown away like chaff?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Like they're like, or are the righteous really just a tree that's firmly planted next to streams? No. But those ideas, especially in that culture where water is scarce, you see a tree that's dying versus a tree, man, it's by the stream. It's always got its fruit. Yeah. And then in the harvest culture, we don't want that chaff.
Get it out.
Let it blow away and just be gone. Like it's just done with. That was some strong imagery for them.
Oh, that is so good. Another familiar psalm, Psalm 19. Michael Mott brings this up very frequently, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people say this is a Torah psalm as well because the second half of it focuses a lot on
the law,
Torah, and really focuses on both sides of it. Natural revelation, special revelation, and so that's why a lot of people consider this a wisdom psalm. But that's one we're just familiar with, and it kind of shows us where to find truth. It's in the fear of the Lord, and it's also saying you can find truth in natural theology. Right. You might need special revelation, but you can find wisdom just baked into the fabric of the universe too, if you study it. Yeah. So with that, maybe we can hit a couple of the more less well-known psalms. We can go through one, we can go through two. In my class, we had time for one. I looked at Psalm 49, and it hits these big themes of, it reads a lot like Ecclesiastes at some points. This guy, the psalmist, he has a problem. He's looking at these people who are, they seem to be doing well, but they're trusting not in God, but in their riches. And he's kind of grappling with it. One thing I'll say, and maybe if you want to read, I don't know how much we want to read or not. The problem with these are they're kind of long.
Yeah.
So it's like challenging to know how you want to unpack it. But a lot of wisdom literature, it's kind of a paradox to me. They're not unpacking. Like they're not blowing your mind with something you've never heard of. Because a lot of times I think wisdom, I want to know the answer to something hyper-specific. It's really saying that something you probably already know to be true. God is who you should be trusting in.
Right.
But let's meditate on that. Let's draw it out because even though we know that's the case, we find ourselves drifting and we're trusting and we're getting all bent out of shape because we don't have our resources. And it's like reorienting us on stuff we know to be true.
No, I think that's good. And just to take a short aside, there's a psalm that says, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. A lot of people, I think, the high places where the false gods were and the gods of that land were worshipped. You see people that will say, they did good, but they didn't tear down the high places and stuff like that. So I think the true understanding of that is, I look up to those places. Where does my help come from? My help comes from
you're making that
the maker of heaven and earth. And it's probably not classified as a wisdom psalm.
Yeah, but
I think that's in the Psalms of Ascent somewhere. So it's probably one of those Thanksgiving psalms. But you see wisdom that we know that's false gods. We don't trust in there. But it's just a reminder, our help daily comes from the maker of the heavens and the earth, not those false places.
And we all know that's true, but it's like, for whatever reason, it's like so basic. You can ask my 6-year-old, he's going to get that right.
Yeah.
But it's like we don't live our lives like that all the time. We catch ourselves. And that's what's so good about wisdom literature. That's helpful. So I don't know what we want to do with Psalm 49. Do we just want to hit the high points? Do you want to read through some of it? What do you want to do?
Yeah, let's hit the high points. Is Psalm 49 chiastic?
Some people say it is. What I use this as an illustration for was it uses a refrain or a chorus. I think we all know what that is. Chris Tomlin's made it very apparent. He can write a chorus like no other. Like I think Babylon has some pretty funny stuff about him writing choruses. So anyway, some people will make a chiasm out of it. To me, it's not as apparent, but it is definitely, I think, symmetrical.
Right.
So probably,
there's 3 stanzas. So kind of 3 different meatier sections that are separated by these two refrains, verse 12 and 20. And are those, so verse 12 is, but man in his pomp will not endure. He is like the beasts that perish. And verse 20 is, man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beast that will perish. So basically,
good.
Almost word for word the same.
Yeah, and that's like actually the point, is that they're almost word for word. They're not word for word, though. And so you should be thinking, why are they like basically the same, but just like a little bit different?
Right. Yeah,
that's like Chris Tomlin should do that. Like write a chorus, and some songs do that. They like change it, and it's like maybe realizing or consummating something Christ did, or it changes and it's like, there's some meaning in there. But that's definitely true in this psalm as well.
Right. And is this the almost the same where it's a play on words?
It's a word play. Yeah. In the Hebrew, it's one letter different. The Hebrew word for will not remain and the word without understanding, depending on your translation, is the same word except for like one letter.
Right.
And so that would like stand out to a Hebrew person.
Yeah. So I remember you bringing that out. And then there's 3 stanzas that are there, and the 3 stanzas are dealing with wealth, then death, and then the inevitability of our death. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you're nailing it. To give you a high level overview, verses 1 through 4, I think we could even say that's an introduction. What wisdom literature does well is it does not discriminate. It's not saying, hey, Jews, this is for you, or Gentiles. It's like, here, everybody, listen to me, high, low, poor, rich. It usually has multiple audiences. You read Proverbs, they're talking to the foolish, the simple, the youth, the wise. They're talking to everyone. You can interpret their messages and go the wrong way with it, but they're calling out, wisdom's calling out to be heard. And you might not like the message. If you're rich, it might be, oh, I need to be warned about this. But if you're poor, you might feel comforted. And so multiple messages, because the audience is everybody. And then really the psalmist in this first verse, some people say it's the second verse. It depends on if you count the first 4 verses as an intro or not. It depends on how you want to classify it. But verses 5 through 11 can be a verse, and then verses 13 through 19 can be a verse, and it kind of unpacks that way, almost perfectly symmetrical if you count the first 4 as an intro. And in the beginning, what we see, or verses 5 through 11 and 12, is that, people who cheat, who sin, who trust in their wealth, they're doing well. But the whole time the psalmist knows what is right. Verse 7 is a key verse. He says, he knows this to be true. Truly no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice. So he knows, he's like, these people are doing wrong, but this is bothering me. This is causing me a lot of trouble. And he then gets to that chorus, man in his pomp or his wealth or his honor, that's not going to remain. He is like beasts that perish. And it starts to sound a whole lot like Ecclesiastes. Because I think we're always trying to make the point, we're not like the animals.
Right.
The psalmist is saying we're actually a lot like the animals, which is depressing, right?
Yeah, especially if you don't live, if it's just horizontally connected, we're not connected vertically, then we are exactly like the beast.
And that's what he's saying. If you're trusting in your wealth, it can't save you. Your life is too costly to redeem. So then he transitions to the second stanza or third stanza, however you want to look at it. And what he's going to say in verse 15, kind of a key verse, it parallels with verse 7. Instead of truly, wealth can't ransom you, he says, but God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol. He will receive me. And then we get to the chorus at the end, man in his pomp, yet without understanding is like the beast that perishes. And what he's saying is, if you don't have wisdom, if you don't have understanding, you don't know who God is, can't redeem you, you are like the beast. And that is depressing.
Right, yeah, yep. No, I think that's good. And there's this word in here that I see that's the name of a band that used to be very...
Sons of Korah, we're a big fan.
Yeah.
Big fan of this band.
Selah. Yeah, so...
Yeah, I made a note on this because I think people think they know what it means, and they might not know what it means, but I don't think anyone really knows with 100% confidence what it means.
Yeah,
because really we just transliterate it from the Hebrew because we don't really know. We don't really have a word for it, and I think we know. But it is interesting looking over church history, the different viewpoints.
What I read was it was a instruction for the tuba. The tuba choir to start playing.
That's great.
That's where the tubas come in.
That is what Justin Martyr was a big fan of the tuba. He said that. It is pretty funny. You look at what I looked up a quote from Jerome from the 300, 400s Vulgate guy. And he was basically like, this word, and a lot of the early church fathers were like, this word means always or everlasting. It's like reaffirming what it's saying. might be true.
Could be like saying amen.
Exactly, yeah. Which I'm like, I could see that.
Amen.
Yeah, it's something you're like, okay, you're reinforcing. A Jewish dictionary from, hundreds of years ago was looking at, we're saying that, we think this is maybe a time for like the instruments to play with more vigor. Maybe it means to exalt or to lift up.
So tubas.
Translation tubas. And then I think a lot of us in the modern era, we take our cues from the Septuagint. Mm-hmm. When they translate for the Greek word that is the Hebrew word sala, which is close to Selah. So they thought that's what they were going for, and that means to pause or reflect. And maybe people are maybe there's a musical interlude in there too as you're pausing, reflecting. Tubas. So these three are not totally disconnected. It probably means something like that.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is tubas.
We should just write in Michael's translation. You're putting together yours will be like tuba, insert
it's
tuba.
Pause. It's reflection. It's the power. It's all those things. It's good. Yeah.
No, I think that Psalm 49. You read it and you're like, oh, it sounds like Ecclesiastes. We probably don't have the time to get into Psalm 73, but it's very similar. Yeah. You read that and it is like Psalm 49. I don't know if it's a chiasm or not. It might be. It's very symmetrical, but it's more like kind of like this antithetical. You got one perspective, then it shifts, but some of those verses line up where it's like they shift. I trust in my wealth, I trust in God, and it's almost like those line up. So maybe it's like an antithetical. What do they call that? Bruce Waltke calls it a Janus for that Greek god for January. That's two-faced, or whatever. That's like it is parallel, but it is more the antithetical.
He's featured in some movies, Two-Faced.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, exactly right. And so it might be more along those lines. That I think that's a good introduction. Gets us a good start to engaging, thinking about wisdom literature.
No, I think that's good. And what I'm going to do out of this, and I encourage our listeners to do this as well, is maybe if there is a problem or difficulty that you're going through, to maybe write some biblical truth about that you could support from like wisdom literature or something, and then maybe write it in a couple different ways, and write that. And then maybe give some supporting reasons why we know that that's true, and maybe write that a couple different ways. Put that on top and in bottom of what you're writing. That's good,
yeah.
And then maybe, because that's what I'm going to do, because, and then maybe you can just go out, because you can work and maybe build out something that's chiastic, because I think it will help. Because I feel like I need to kind of train my mind to see this better, and how better to train your mind to see it and to kind of to work through it. I think it could be as simple as that. So.
I love that idea, to kind of think in those ways. I said it in the Sunday school class. I didn't say it here yet, but I've read in a book, I did not back check this, but 70% of the words that come out of Jesus' mouth are either a chiasm or a proverb. I believe this, or a parable, because that's a lot of text. So that probably evens out the numbers a little bit. But it's kind of wisdom-esque in that it's not super straightforward, and it's written a lot in the same structure. So I think that is good to think along those lines a little bit.
Yeah. Might help us think that way, because I think it's so foreign to our ways. And I'm in my Bible study, I'm in the Gospels right now. And so you'll read some from Matthew. It's chronological.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And Matthew, it's just written different. He's writing to a different audience with different genre expectations than we do. Like he, time lapses stuff. Like, yep, this fig tree on that very same day was cursed. Where I think it's Luke breaks it apart. It's like he cursed it at night. They came back the next morning. It was cursed. And so it's not wrong. It's just different ways. And so, helping us kind of get there, I think can help connect Scripture to us better.
I like it. I love it. I want more wisdom, Michael. So maybe we'll get some along the way.
All right. So that's our take.
Thanks for listening to Take Two. Find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube for those who want to watch our videocast.